Okay, so like she said, my name's Anna Morton, and I'm doing my UD talk on Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks, and it really centers on black women and feminism. It was actually published in 1981 when she was 19 years old, so I think that speaks a lot as to how in tune she was with her intellect and like analyzing situations as such that we'll go deeper into. But first off, who is Bell Hooks? Well, her name is actually Gloria Jean Watkins. She has the pseudonym of Bell Hooks because she wanted a separate voice where she could be more critical in her works, and she picked it by her grandmother's name, and it's lowercase letters because she wanted the emphasis to be on her work rather than her name associated with the work. I thought that was pretty cool. She was born in 1952 in Kentucky, and her schools, when she first started out, were still segregated. They weren't integrated until 1960, and she writes about how she saw such a difference between the two before they were integrated, that mostly when she was younger, that she had these young female black teachers, and that they really instilled a sense of self-confidence and really embracing her race and her gender. And then when her schools were integrated, that her teachers were like more hesitant to allow her to learn more freely, because she talks about how white people were so hesitant to allow these black children to get a true education because they thought that if they were educated, they would be a threat to society and to white people as dominating the society. She got her degree at Stanford in English literature. She's one of the most widely published black feminist scholars in the U.S. And if you're wondering what feminism truly means, she gives you a definition in the book. And it says, the established definition of feminism is a theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. But she goes on to say, but white women liberationists use the power granted them by virtue of their being members of the dominant race in American society to interpret feminism in such a way that it is no longer relevant to all women. Just kind of touching how the white women and the black women like couldn't necessarily bond together as a sisterhood to fight for feminism, because white women were more concerned about race than they were as bonding together as their gender of women and fighting for feminism. She taught African American studies and women's studies. This book is actually used a ton in college classes to study on African American studies and women's studies. She saw teaching as one of her most important works. Like, even though she wrote all these novels and did all this research and everything, she thought that teaching was most important because that's where she could like have her hand in educating people so that they could know more what was going on and fight for what they believed in and could stand for. She is an activist for liberation of the oppressed, and so that's why she believes that education is so important. It's essential, especially to those that are marginalized and discriminated against, in order for them to acquire a more critical consciousness of what's going on in the world. So kind of like how she is more passionate about teaching in that way, like that's why I chose teaching, because I saw it as a way to have a first hand on molding these students' lives that will eventually like be the leaders of America and like make a difference in the world. So what better way to have an impact than being a teacher and being with these students day in and day out. But so what are we talking about in Bell Hooks? Like I said, she thinks that education is liberating, especially to those that are oppressed. And she sees that discrimination and domination are all interconnected. And it kind of like ties into how she talks about oppression let me read it to you. In this book, let's see, it says, to both groups, I voiced my conviction that the struggle to end racism and the struggle to end sexism were naturally intertwined, that to make them separate was to deny a basic truth of our existence, that race and sex are both immutable facets of human identity. So already at the age of 19, she could see how sexism and racism were intertwined, because not only was she seen as an inferior because she was black, she was also seen as an inferior because she was a black woman. And so these white men, it was like, she talks about how, like on a totem pole or whatever, it's white men, white women, and then black women. So they're at the bottom. They were like irrelevant in society because they were black and they were a woman. So she wrote a bunch of books on different teaching communities, and one that was really relevant to Paulo Freire was a pedagogy of hope and a pedagogy of the oppressed. And I'll just like pass those around if y'all want to look at them. But she collaborated with him, and he's like one of the founders of the critical pedagogy, and a lot of her work is based off of her collaboration with him. So that's really interesting to see how the two work together very closely. But let's see. So with the discrimination and domination, she takes that and acknowledges her authority in the classroom, and she knows the limits, and then she uses that to make this relationship between the teacher and the student. So like she diffuses this hierarchy of domination so that there doesn't have to be this power in the classroom, to create this environment that allows for free thinking and just a safe haven for these kids to think freely. And that goes into all these pedagogies of hope and critical thinking and oppressed. And so let's see, this whole book in Ain't I a Woman is about oppression and like how the history of black women have felt oppressed from slavery on to 1981. It like talks about the journey of why they started out being oppressed and why they are still feeling oppressed in today's age. But she says that the black woman was victimized by sexist and racist oppression was seen as insignificant, for a woman suffering, however great, could not take precedence over male pain. And then she says, most feminists assumed that problems black women faced were caused by racism, not sexism. So that just like further talks about how the black women were just feeling like this huge oppression for years on just because they were black and they were women. But, okay, let's see. These oppressions are created a lot by society. Like for a woman, we are told, she often talks about how we are told that we need to be submissive, innocent, and modest. And she like kind of takes a step back to think about it critically, like where does that come from? Why are we not considered a woman if we aren't those characteristics? And something that kind of like correlates with that, if you've ever read the book Mona Lisa Smile or seen the movie Mona Lisa Smile, it's on Netflix. Y'all should really watch it. It's interesting. This teacher goes to this all-white school, elite college that is only for women, and it's in the 1950s. And she's trying to teach them art and trying to like help them to think more critically about art, like what does it mean, what's behind it, and like how can you apply that to life. And it's hard for them to open up and think freely because they've been set to just assume these roles as students and as white women. And even though that they're having this education, like they don't want to do anything with it after they graduate. All they want to do is become a wife or become a housekeeper or whatever. They don't see this education as something that they can use. Like a student wants to go to law school, but she's like, I can't do that because I need to be a wife. She doesn't understand that she can do both. And so, let's see, she kind of touches on that. Where did it go? Okay, she says, by completely accepting the female role as defined by patriarchy, enslaved black women embraced and upheld an oppressive, sexist social order and became, along with their white sisters, both accomplices in the crimes perpetrated against women and the victims of those crimes. So, bell hooks and the idea of Mona Lisa Smile kind of work together in saying that these women that just assume these roles are like feeding this oppression. They aren't actually doing anything to break the oppression and break the roles that society is setting for us as women or as black people or white people or whatever you associate yourself with that have these oppressions. So where can you find this in standards? Okay, I kind of did mine more towards math since that's my concentration, but I'm not going to read them to y'all. Y'all can read, obviously. But the first one is just about how we said earlier, collaborating and creating this community that is open to talking things out and thinking aloud with each other. And then the next one kind of tags along with that, this critical thinking, justifying your conclusions and questioning how you got there and extending like where you got that from. And but in order to reach the full potential of these standards that all these people have set for teachers, this wall of discrimination has to be broken within the classroom. These students need to feel equal as students, where that they can bring these differences and not feel that they are such a difference. They need to realize that this is a strength that they need to embrace, like how Bell Hooks, her teachers, made her feel more confident and embrace her race and her sex. And so also that helps for the students, for them to be exposed to this diversity, and it'll help them to think more critically because they'll see standpoints from different points of view, different backgrounds, and that'll help them when they get in the real world. So how do you take what I've read in Bell Hooks and her studies and her work in the field of education and apply that to teaching? Well, in general, I just thought about, at first, I really didn't understand what I was doing because this book is more of a history critique on the behalf of black women and feminism. And so I had to talk to Dr. K, and I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here. So after I talked to her, I realized that you have to dive deeper into the text and kind of read between the lines as to what she's saying just at the age of 19 years old, which is around the age of what we're going to be teaching if you want to teach high school. And so I just realized that since she experienced this oppression during her lifetime and she just really got to connect with it, that helped with her understanding of oppression, and that's what all of her work is on, is liberating the oppression, or oppression of the liberating, or whatever. And so as teachers, we can take that and say we need a deeper understanding of our students' frame of reference, of whether it's culture, gender, language abilities, whatever, so that we can better empathize with them and include them in the classroom. Also, to build a community like Hooks teachers early on, that create an empowering environment where they embrace their differences, and to promote critical thinking within that community, which we touched on earlier. But as a math teacher, what can I take away from this? This table came from the Common Core standards, actually, that I found, and it talked about how we could stop this frequent time testing or harsh grading and emphasizing speed to our students, because students that can't necessarily take these time tests and freak out when they have to emphasize speeds, they just shut down because they're like, I'm not capable to do that fast, and I need more time to think about it and talk about it and work through it more slowly. And so maybe refrain from that as much as possible, and in order for them to instead of grading, you can give diagnostic feedback, okay, let's talk about what did you get wrong, why did you think it was like that, and let's think about how we can take that and manipulate it to get you back to where you're on the right track, and think about it more critically so you can get it right the next time. Let's see. Also, to guide your students to the formula, Rachel kind of talked on this a little bit about, instead of just flat out saying, okay, here, memorize the Pythagorean theorem, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I remember in high school, there was stuff like that all the time where it was just given to you, you memorize it, and you apply it for the rest of your life. But you never look back and you think, why does that work? What is Pythagorean theorem? Is that a person? I don't know. How do you think about that critically? And I'm realizing that a lot now because I'm in Foundations of Math, and it's awful. But just you have to unfold all these definitions of math terms, like G composed of F. If just the function of G is injective and not the function F, can the whole composition of G of F still be injective? And so you have to, it sounds crazy, but you make more sense of it when you're okay, what does injective mean? What does composition mean? And then, okay, let's work out an example to see if F is injective, can still the whole thing be injective? And that's kind of what they're talking about here, that if you can just think more critically and know the background of why, what's going on, why is this always true in math, then students will be more likely to remember it and be able to apply it and understand it and get a real grasp on what they're learning. And so that's kind of what I got from In Our Women, which was just on black women and feminism, and I just took it and kind of ran with it. It's crazy how much information could come just from that. But even though this was written in 1981 and that might seem outdated information, it really, once you dive into it, can see how it's still applicable so much to today. And just really taking this and critically thinking. And I think this class as a whole, just analyzing all of these different educational theorists will help us as teachers to, not only for the students to help make them think critically, but us to think critically and knowing what all these theorists are thinking, so that we can take all of that and digest it and use that in our classroom to really make an impact in our classes. But that's it. Thank y'all.